And as we continue in our series on the book of Revelation, what a book with all the vision that we can find about Christ, about God. And for me, this book is one of either most misinterpreted or thing that people would do, because instead of really seeing the Christ of Revelation, they are seeing more of the other events that would make them fearful. It is supposed to be a book that will encourage us, that would make us happy, that would make us looking forward and persevering whatever we are going through, because we know that God is on the throne. And so last Sunday we saw Jesus Christ moving along different churches, revealing part and parcel of his character that is appropriate to that every church. He is showing himself as the one who is in control of the representatives of those churches unto God, those 7 stars. And now the venue is something surprising to John. With the church shutting down across the globe, it's time for us to show that the church has never been about the building, as you can see here. Because we, the people, we are the church, not the building. And in the same token, when they were also dispersed and some people are in exile, they can find that the one that they are worshiping and the one that even the church would be the ones who are the people who are responding to God at this time. So, as you know, we would like to see that in this vision of John, he is now moving from the vision here on earth of what Christ is still doing to the churches and to the world, to that of the vision of Christ and God himself on the throne in heaven. And if we would like to have a peek, at least, of what heaven would look like, it would be something. It's like we have a tour going to heaven, but it's not just a tour going to heaven. It is a tour going to the most powerful place wherein the source of power is right there. As we would like to see here on earth, we have the Oval Office. If you're going to have a tour of the White House, it is not as powerful until you see the Oval Office. If you would be in China, it's not as powerful if you have entered the Tiananmen Square and all those, the party themselves coming together. And then if you would be in England, you would see at least here 2 seats of power. The Prime Minister at 10 Downing Street and the Queen at the Buckingham Palace. I was asking Brian how was it when he went to London. And I said, have you seen Big Ben? Oh, yes. There's some story about that, but let him do it. And not only he saw Big Ben, he had also some picture at the front of the Buckingham Palace. But then I was asking him, were you invited in? No way. So, well, in any case, John did not just have a tour of heaven. He was invited there. And that is why, in order for him to understand that, it must be something beyond the empirical observation that we can have here on earth. It must be something beyond the sensitivity of our eyesight, of our ears, and of our sense of touch and all of that. Because no eye has seen, nor ear has heard, no mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love him. Where our eyes could no longer see, where our ears could no longer hear, where our mind could no longer imagine. Beyond that is what God has still in store for you and for me. And in order for us to understand that, verse 10 of 1 Corinthians 2, Paul was saying, you must be in the Spirit of God. Because it can only be revealed to us by his Spirit. And that is why, look at John, in John chapter 4, Revelation 4, verse 1. After this I looked, and there before me was a door open in heaven, and the voice I had first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." And then you will find it later on that the reason why he was able to do that is he was in the Spirit. He was invited in. He was invited in not just in the Oval Office, not just at the very throne room at Buckingham Palace, not just at the very place where the party in Tiananmen Square or in Red Square or in Moscow. He was invited in right there, the throne room of God in heaven. It was a vision. And how did he was able to see that? Look at verse 2. At once I was in the Spirit. And that's why it's so important that we are in tune with the Holy Spirit to see this. It is not something that just our eyes or ears or our touch or our empirical observation can do. It must be our spirit communing with the Spirit, and the Spirit himself will be the one to reveal it to us. And right there, he started to see the most strange thing that would happen to him. The most powerful place in the universe. He saw a throne in heaven with someone sitting on it. And you will find here, at least the beauty of it is, sometimes you will see so many different thrones here on earth, office of power here on earth, and we wonder how the person sitting on the chair of seat of power will fit it, or fit on it. That's why we're so conscious about who are we going to vote or who are we going to support, because we just want to just see the seat of power. We want someone who is fitted to sit right there. And so John was seeing that. The seat of power was beholden, was presented to him, and also the one sitting on it. And he said, who is the one seated on it? The one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and carnelian and rainbow, resembling of an emerald, encircled the throne. He was just describing with all the vocabulary and with all the words that he can get here on earth to describe what's there beyond what Webster Dictionary can provide. He is trying to describe it. But as it is, you will find here that it is the vision of the most powerful, not only in terms of the throne, but the person himself, the being himself of God. So what a privilege. And then he started to see that surrounding this throne, the very throne of the most powerful, are 24 thrones around. And they are representing the 24 elders, which people could say, or scholars would say, either the 12 tribes of Israel represented and the 12 disciples in the church, early church presented, or in general, these are the representation of humanity in heaven. How from the very center of the throne, we have the very thrones surrounding us, endowed upon by the God himself, by him who is sitting on the throne. And notice what they have. They have white dress, meaning to say they are pure, they are purified. And then they have golden crowns, meaning to say that they have been given authority and recognition or reward. The difference between this kind of crowns and that of God's crown is that the crowns that they have is a crown of reward. It is from the word Stephanos, which means rewarded crown, like the one in the Olympics, or like the one that's been granted by someone who is powerful. So we have we can find those laurel type of crown as a reward for those who have performed well. That's the same word that was used, that they were given that crown. It's a gift. It's an endowment from God. The crown of God is not being endowed by anything. It's called diademos, the one we call the diadem. And that is why the one in the middle of the throne is the giver of reward, the giver of recognition, and they were the recipient here, the 24 elders. Not only that is the projection surrounding from the throne outward. If the 24 elders would be the projection of those who are on earth representing in the heavenlies, right there is now the projection of the four living creatures would be the one projecting from God, going out, emanating, moving forward. It's been described here as the four living creatures, and they were covered with eyes in front and in back. What a picture. It doesn't mean literally that they have so many eyes. He was just using what he can use in terms of his own experience, but the eyes would represent the whole perfect omniscience or knowledge of God about everything, that everything is in his immediate presence, that he can know everything beyond that throne. And then not only that, look at the appearances or the description of these four living creatures. The first was, he looks like a lion. And you know, lion would be the king of the jungle, the so-called wild animals. And the second was like an ox. And during that agricultural time, who is the king of the field? The ox. They are the ones tilling the field. They are the ones being there. And so the ox was being provided here as the king of the field. And then the third one was a face like a man, and who has given the dominion over all creation by God, man himself. So quote unquote that we are king over the created being here on earth. And then the fourth was like a flying eagle. And you will find here the eagle is like representation of the king of the birds. And what's being presented here is that all over, coming around the very character of God who is seated on the throne, is now projecting kingship, authority, power, onward, and complete knowledge of everything. And so you see their attributes and their attribution. And what were they saying here is that day and night, they never stop saying, holy, holy, holy is the God Almighty, who was and is to come. That's quite a presentation, because the very center of God's attributes we can find here is his holiness, his utter otherness, that he is someone that is incorruptible, someone that you could not even present yourself without demanding holiness on the part of the one coming before him. And that's why when he said, holy, 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 you will find it has been placed on at least 3 degrees of character and attribution. You will find that that's the only character of God that has been given such kind of recognition. Isaiah saw that in Isaiah 6. But the angels and those 4 living creatures also saying, holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. And then he said, I saw the King, the Lord Almighty. So it is really the center and the seat of power of the King, the Lord Almighty. And I like what's coming there later, who was, who is, and who is to come. That shows that God, the King, has his presence and influence in all tenses at the same time. We people can only be in one so-called tense. We are just a present tense being. The past, we cannot go back, we can recall. The future, we cannot go ahead, we can even project and imagine. But what we can only be is here and now. But when you talk about God in his being, everything is there in his immediate presence, in the sense of the past, present, and future is just the same with him. And that's why when we resent about nothing, that we cannot do anything in the past, he is still able to do something because he is still present right there. And then when we are so worrying about the future, he is already there because he is present as the one to come. And he is also present right here and now. And so when we see that kind of God we have, what an encouragement we would have that someone is in control of our past, and someone is in control of our future, and someone is our enabling power right here and now in the present. And John saw that. This is the kind of God we have. The kind of God that cannot be threatened by anything in the past, the present, and the future, because He is always in control. As we move forward, we will just see it this way. We saw that God and the Lamb is in the middle. We see those 4 living creatures projecting His being and character. And then we can see those 24 elders as shown as recipient of God's grace and mercy by the endowment of the thrones and the crowns and the white dresses. That's what happened when we are being presented at the very seat of the most powerful. We are experiencing this, and it's good to see even now that we know that God is in control. Now, as you would see it, it was not the only time they have seen God in the terms. They saw that even in the wilderness. You know, if there's one big reason why we have the Exodus, or why Israel went out of Egypt, it is not just to go to Promised Land. Again and again, it was said to Pharaoh by Moses, and God was using Moses to tell him, "Tell Pharaoh, let my people go so that they may worship me in the desert, in the wilderness." Meaning to say, the main reason for the Exodus is for them to learn to worship, for them to see God for who He is and worship God for who He is, and not only for what He can do. And so that's the main reason. And God has revealed all of those things in the wilderness. Remember, in the wilderness was the place where God has given Moses all the detail of the tabernacle. And not only that, it was there in the wilderness. He gave the 10 Commandments. It was there in the wilderness that He gave all of those ways of how can a sinful man present himself to a holy God. They learned how to worship in the wilderness. And interestingly enough, when they camped together, they camped with those 12 tribes. Will have the head tribe for every 3 of them: north, south, east, and west. And when you start seeing them, the banner of those head tribe would be representing the ox, Ephraim, toward the west; eagle, Dan, toward the north; and then toward the east, Judah, lion; and toward the south, man, Reuben. And we just saw it a while ago in John. Those 4 living creatures were presented that way at the very throne of God, and that is why when they have the tabernacle in the wilderness, the Holy of Holies would have the Ark of the Covenant. And right in the place, so-called of the Ark of the Covenant, in between the 2 cherubims, the space between their wings is called the mercy seat, representing the very throne of God. And so, in a sense, there is already the intervention of what John saw in chapter 4 of Revelation to that, even at the time of Moses, that this is how God is. And that's why if we can see from the time of Moses until now, it did not change, because God is still in the most powerful place and is still in control. And even so, as scholars would put it, that even the 4 Gospels can be representing all of those. Like Matthew would be representing Jesus Christ as the King, like the Lion of Judah. And Mark will be representing Jesus as a servant, like an ox. And Luke will be representing Jesus as man, like in his humanity. And then John representing Jesus as divine, which is like an eagle. And even Ezekiel saw those kind of characterization of God Himself. So what is being presented here, folks? No matter what time in history, God is revealing Himself that most powerful. And mind you, He is revealing Himself in His absolute power at the very hard times and difficult times that his people are going through. He revealed himself to his people as they are going out of slavery, as they're going out from the bondage of Egypt into that hardship in the wilderness, and yet they saw God in his beautiful, powerful character there. Ezekiel, when he saw that four living creatures again in the throne of God, they were in exile, not knowing what will happen after they have destroyed Jerusalem, after they have destroyed even the temple. What will happen? And Ezekiel saw that kind of perspective of God. And now here the time of John, and the church is now having that hardship, facing whatever the Roman Empire is inflicting upon them. Him being in exile, in that hard situation and difficult situation, still they can see the most powerful image and revelation and vision of God. In the same way with us, sometimes we don't know why we are going through some difficult times, not knowing that during those most difficult times, we are seeing the best and the brightest and the most magnificent about God, of God himself. Someone has said, sometimes, or most of the time, there are more lessons we will learn from situations that made us cry than situations that made us laugh. And that's what we can see. God has revealed himself in that beautiful situation. Now, how about the interaction now about this in the throne room? The one seated on the throne, the four living creatures, and the 24 elders. What we are seeing now is the synergy around the most powerful. Verse 9, it says, whenever the living creatures give glory, honor, and thanks to him. So that's their activity. From the throne room, from the throne and seat of power, what's going out would be glory, honor, and thanksgiving to him who sits on the throne and who lives forever and ever. How about the 24 elders? What will they do in the interaction for what is coming out from the throne? Whenever they hear that, look at what they're doing. Verse 10, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They lay down their crowns before the throne and say, you are worthy, O Lord, our God, Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being. So what's this? What's being said is, when the character of God is emanating and going out, here comes the 24 elders, the first people representing humanity, will receive such an impact. What they will do, they will bow down. They will bow down. And in order for them to bow down, what will happen to their thrones? It will become empty because they have to lay down. And then it did not stop there. They were recognized by being given crowns. And what will they do to the crowns? They will even lay down their crowns. Now, if the four living creatures are saying this again and again, day and night, forever and ever, would there be a time for those 24 elders to sit back on the throne? Will there be a time for those 24 elders to put back their crowns? No. It's a continuous way of recognition that we owe everything on God, and he is the one worthy of all those things. While the 24 living creatures are singing, holy, 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 the 24 elders falling down and leaving their throne and putting down their crowns would say, worthy, 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 worthy is the Lord. What a beautiful synergy and interaction. And that is why, as we close this, we will find that we can have also our response to the most powerful. And what will be our response? There's only one word, and that is worship. The four living creatures were worshiping when they are there in the presence of the Almighty. The 24 elders were worshiping when they were there, the Almighty. And next Sunday we will find even how this is going to go bigger than that. when we see the lamb that was slain right there in John chapter 5, Revelation 5. And I hope so that would be, you will have a time to read that even ahead of time. And so, those are the two things. It is being proclaimed that God is holy by those representing God in his being, the four living creatures. It is also being proclaimed by the 24 elders that God is worthy. And when they do that, they can experience the most wonderful thing that we can experience also the same. Because four things also happen to us. We need to understand that the place of worship, or where God is worshipped, is the most powerful place we can be. Why? Because we are connected to him who sits on the throne. That nothing can threaten his purity. Nothing can contaminate him. If we're talking about quarantine nowadays, and we are trying to make sure that nothing can come into our house, and even whatever virus would come in, we have all these sanitizers and we have all these things that we try to clean, because we don't want that virus to come in and visit anyone in the family or here in the house. Whenever you are connected to God himself in his way, we are actually recipient of such a wonderful connection to the one who will never be contaminated at any time. If you are wondering where God is, let's say to each other, God is still pure and wonderful and powerful. Nothing can diminish such power, even in the pandemic that we are experiencing like this. And how would it be if this place of worship would be our home? What happens when there will be husband and wife would be connected to that, in our relationships would be connected to a place and to a person we worship? What do you think will happen to the quality of our relationship as husband and wife, as parents to children, and children to the parents, and to one another, that you know that we are connected to where God is, to his throne? It means a wonderful, powerful place to be, to overcome any temptation, to overcome any challenge, because we are with the most powerful when we worship. The second thing that we will find is that the place of worship is the most beautiful place. Isn't that wonderful? That the more we are seeing the description of God right there, John was just able to get his description of those beautiful, precious stones, jasper, and all of that, and diamond. What a beautiful scenery that he can find. And when we are in the state of worship, we can see God in his beauty. And the psalmist was saying, oh, worship the Lord in the beauty of his holiness. Aren't you glad that you and I have a holy God that we can worship? A beautiful God that we can have. And when we start seeing that, and we worship the one who is the most beautiful of all, and it will visit again our relationship at home and our relationship with one another, don't you think that it can also beautify our relationship to one another, whether in marriage, whether in parenting, whether that? A beautiful place would be our homes, our relationship with people. Why? Because we are in the state of worship and recognition from the most beautiful of all, God Almighty. Then thirdly, we will find that the place of worship is the purest place. Oh, how's that for a sanitized, conscious mind that we have now? Isn't that we would like to be in that place? We don't want to have a God who is dirty, right? You don't want to have a God that is evil. We don't have the kind of person we worship that is so malicious. But when you start to know that God is the purest of all, holy, 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 what a place to be, the purest of all, that instead of contaminating him when sin would come, when evil would come, they are the ones being touched powerfully rather than making God impure. And that is why even John, as we will look at in Revelation, as we look forward in the future, that it will say that nothing impure will enter heaven or that place or the New Jerusalem. And that is why everything must be cleansed. And that's what the purpose of this book is. As if God is saying, see when God purifies all things and make everything new. Because the place of worship is the purest place. What will happen to the mind of each other? The way we think to each other. Imagine the husband looking to the wife with pure mind, and the wife to the husband with pure mind, and the family are just having the purity of that relationship. Isn't that great? That we need to again learn this. And after all these times that we've been in the house, stay in the place, I hope that by this time we will learn how the place where we live is the most powerful, the most beautiful, the most pure place we can have. And lastly, the place of worship is the safest place to be. How secured would we be when we are connected to Him, who is the most powerful of all? How protected we should be, and we could be, when we know that neither life nor death nor principalities, nothing can separate us from such a wonderful, powerful God. That even though we'd say, well, what can we do? This virus has killed us, and even at the point of death, that's still not able to stop God to go beyond. He has the concept of resurrection. He has the concept of going on even after this world is gone, because He is the only one who has the most powerful way and the safest way to deal with us. My prayer at this time is that as we go on, one thing we will learn, as the Israelites learned worship in the wilderness, as the exiles learned worship in the wilderness, as the early church learned worship in their hardest times, may we learn the same thing, even as we go on. This is the kind of God we have. This is the kind of relationship we have. So be in the most powerful place, in the most beautiful place, in the purest place, in the safest place, where God is seated on the throne. Amen.